Hello and welcome to another episode of Race to 2020, a new podcast from Sky News Australia. I'm James Morrow, opinion editor of the Daily Telegraph and co-host of Outsiders on Sky News.
And I'm Jack Houghton from Sky News Australia, and we have a cracker lineup for this episode. A lot of it is pertaining to race, James.
Yeah, well, that's right, Jack. I mean, it's funny because when we were talking about names for this podcast, and we kicked around a lot of different names, but it's funny because we are calling it the Race to 2020, and that is actually more accurate every week than we would have known even a month ago when we first started to scope this whole idea out. And that's because now with the whole Russia collusion thing, and I really want to talk a little bit later on about just how the media is driving so much of this, both back in the US and also here in Australia. But really, this is now with Russia having fizzled out, this is going to be an absolute referendum on race and racism in America. That is what the Democrats are trying to frame this up as. But as I think we're going to see, I think this is actually going to be a huge strategic mistake for the Democrats.
Yeah, they're drawing the boundaries now on racial lines. Now, and if we look specifically at one particular, I'm going to say future failed candidate, Beto O'Rourke.
Future failed candidate. I mean, yeah, so like Beto O'Rourke. Okay, we're going to talk some poll numbers in a bit, but Beto O'Rourke, you remember a few months ago, he was the absolute darling. He had that kind of almost Kennedy-esque swagger about him. They thought he was Bobby 2.0 and all that. Plus, here's the thing, the great funny thing about him, he goes by the name Beto, which is a kind of a Hispanic nickname because he's from Texas.
Sure.
But his real name is Robert Francis O'Rourke, and he is married to the heiress to some billionaire fortune, a bit sort of like John Kerry. And so they've tried to sort of work this sort of race thing very cynically with him. But what's really interesting now is that as his campaign has descended right down to, we're talking 1%, 2%, 3% poll numbers because he was really just an empty suit.
So he's essentially irrelevant.
He's essentially irrelevant now. But
he's so loud.
Well, he's loud. He jumps on tables. He's manic. And, anybody who's interested, go back and read some of the stuff about him when he was younger. He was just absolutely nuts. He wrote some of the weirdest teenage poetry that's ever been committed to a notebook. And he also even once ran from the cops after a DUI accident. So he's got a bit of history.
Charming fellow.
Charming fellow, So, like, this guy was going to be the great hope of the Democratic Party. It was pretty funny. But the interesting thing now is that he's trying to rehabilitate, reinvigorate, reinflate this campaign, which has absolutely fallen apart on him. And how is he going to do that? With the issue of race. And I think we have a bit of a grab of a speech that he gave here in Arkansas. So let's have a listen to that.
Though we would like to think otherwise, was founded on racism, has persisted through racism, and is racist today.
Right. Okay, so let's stop and break down what Beto O'Rourke is saying there. Beto O'Rourke is saying. He's saying that America was founded on racism, has always been racist, is racist today. Now, I mean, I don't know about you, Jack, but I'm old enough to remember back in 2016 when Trump was running for president on the Make America Great Again slogan, Democrats kept saying, hey, hang on, America is already great. And now, of course, they've got to talk down the United States here. But, to think that this running very, very hard to the left sort of idea that, racism was the only thing that is really just the foundation, touchstone of the United States, of everything that the United States is about. I mean, I think a lot of Americans are going to look at that and say, well, hang on a second. There was slavery. An awful lot of people died in the Civil War to end slavery. An awful lot of people fought very hard in the Civil Rights Movement, both black and white, to end Jim Crow-era segregation. A lot of people have really worked very hard over the last several hundred years and right up to today to eliminate the scourge of racism, and to just lump the whole country into this box and say, well, it's irredeemably racist. I mean, I think that's just an easy way to turn off middle American voters, Jack.
Yeah, it's not only is it puerile and a little infantile, but it's an overly simplistic way of summing up history, which is, look, America does have a history that does really in-depthly involve racism. But it's more than just that. it's not its only story.
Well,
America is not founded on the principles of racism. In fact, it is the country which went through and fought a civil war over racism.
Exactly, and I mean, we're talking a little bit about the New York Times and their effort to turn this whole thing into a race election as well. And I mean, I think it's just an insult to everybody in America to say that this is the sole thing.
How do you think this is going to play out when? So look, when I'm seeing some of this stuff, it reminds me of perhaps some of the Obama-esque campaigning methods where he got a massive black turnout in terms of voting, and they weren't able to replicate that with Hillary Clinton. And they really thought that she was going to sail in if she was going to divide people on racial lines.
Yeah.
I think that they're doubling down. I think that they're making a big mistake. They're doubling down on this racial rhetoric, and it's going to be a mistake if they don't have the right candidate.
Right. So this is where we get to the question of who is going to be candidate. Now, we talked last week, and every week I've been saying Joe Biden's support. It's just a lot of people parking their vote, parking their preference with the pollsters while they wait for things to shake out.
Exactly. And if Joe Biden is the candidate and they're drumming it up with these big racial lines, do you know much about his history in terms of the racial segregation?
But this is the interesting thing. So, I mean, I think I almost have to defend Joe Biden here a little bit.
Sure, I would too.
Because the thing is that Joe Biden has had a career that has spanned literally decades in American politics. And as such, his position on a lot of issues will have evolved with mainstream thinking. And the mainstream of American thinking would have been well over somewhere else 40 or 50 years ago on race than it is today. And I do think that it is unfair just on that level to say, well, you've been in public life for 40 or 50 years, so we are going to pull up things that you wrote in the 70s, for example, about these issues because things were just, it was an entirely different time. And you
holding people of history to modern standards.
You cannot be held in 2019 to the same standards of something in 1979. It's just simply a different sort of thing.
Kamala Harris, it's been one of her main attack points that he has a checkered history of race, and he is the front runner. So it's going to be hard then for the Democrats to pivot and then endorse Biden when they've made it all about systemic racism.
And I don't think, though, that they're going to endorse Biden. And here's why. I don't think it actually has anything to do with the race issue. I think that Donald Trump absolutely nailed it when he started calling him Sleepy Joe. Okay? Because Sleepy Joe is simply not getting it done on the campaign trail. He's, I think, 73 years old from memory, but he just doesn't have a lot of stamina, it seems. So, he'll come out, he'll do a couple events. These events will create acres and acres of coverage for the wrong and weird things he said. I mean, remember last week, Jack, when he talked about how poor kids could be just as smart as white kids, and everybody just thought, "Oh my God, what's going on?"
Is
with
this some
guy?
Freudian slip?
And then he tried to recover, and he just made it worse. But he keeps saying things like that. He's gaffe prone, but not only is he gaffe prone, there's also just the question: does he simply have the stamina to do it? Because he goes to an event and then he disappears from the campaign trail for several days. So he doesn't seem to be able at this stage to be able to maintain what is a really, really grueling pace. Just to go back for a second to the 2016 campaign. The simple reason why Trump won is just he got in front of so many more people in key states. And he was doing 2 or 3 rallies a day in all of these Midwestern states, flying from place to place to place, doing speech after speech after speech. And he just had the energy to keep this whole thing, keep his campaign going and get himself in front of more people than Hillary Clinton. And that is, I think...
And his events are sensational it's kind of like a comedy show. When he starts riffing, that's President Trump when he's at his best. He enjoys it.
He does, and he's got this sort of, kind of New York sensibility. He's very New York. He's very out of borough.
It's a lot of fun.
I got to give a rap to the Daily Telegraph's Miranda Devine, who in a column today when we're talking about it, but you can go back and look it up, went to a Trump rally in New Hampshire the other day, and she described the atmosphere and how people in the rally, he just works through, and everybody, comes in and he brings everybody in, and Trump brings everybody into this. And so what her point was is that while everybody, in the media just wants to think that Trump is all about hate, actually he really embraces the crowd and says, I love you, and they love him, and it's really, I think it's a case of, as they say, love Trump's hate.
And it's polarizing people on racial lines it hasn't worked.
No.
And people do not like being people don't like being told they're racist and preached to. So look, Beto, he's got zero chance of becoming the president. I think we can safely say this. He's polling at less than 1% in some polls.
You might go put $10 on Sportsbet because anything could happen and you can pay your mortgage, but no.
But I think he's more a symbol of how the party has changed around Joe Biden. So Joe Biden's got like a history. Look, you can debate the history, whether it's good or it's bad, whereas some policies got behind were good or bad, and obviously he was heavily involved in the healthcare reforms with Obama. You can debate this all day, but the party appears to have been pulled so far to the left that Joe Biden almost doesn't have a place.
Joe Biden doesn't have a place, and
that's with the base, but the moderates, the country, if they go back to the moderates, they can win. Trump's not unbeatable.
So, of course, and I don't
have some coffee.
I don't think that he's unbeatable at all, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why I think that is. But no, he's not unbeatable. Nobody's unbeatable. Nothing's a sure thing. Absolutely not. But if they get themselves so far out to sea that they can't swim back to shore, then they're going to be in a lot of trouble. Which brings us to, I think, Elizabeth Warren, who is right now firming up Pocahontas, or as Trump like, you can say that. Well, you just did send all the angry letters to Jack, or Pocahontas, because of course
that's a good one.
We all know about her really bizarre sort of thing where apparently there was some family lore in the Warren history that there was an ancestor who was Native American and so on. Anyway, she kind of pumped this up, and there's a lot of charges that she actually used this to get to teach at Harvard and things like that. And she really made this a big feature of her biography. And then she bizarrely took a DNA test. Now, taking a DNA test for Native American heritage is also just a fraught thing because they can't really do that. It's a bit...
I heard they actually were testing against South American DNA and Cuban DNA.
So it's more the DNA that they're testing is more about heritage from indigenous Central and South Americans.
Yeah.
But anyway, the end result comes back 1,024th of percent, which is essentially statistically nil. And anybody, if she's 99.9% not Native American.
Exactly. Yet she used that to try and say, aha.
And so of course, with the fraught politics of race, this would, this added to her story to say, oh, well, look, this would be another sort of thing, okay, yes, I'm a rich white woman, but hang on, I've got my own sort of racial history that...
She's got as much racial history as any single white person living in America.
Well, exactly.
And it's not even... She's 0.1% not even Native American. She's 0.1% Native American, South American, Cuban.
Yeah, whatever.
Everybody has that.
And the thing is, though, Jack, it's such a depressing thing now because the Democrats, which are supposed to be the left, which are supposed to be the anti-racism people, race doesn't matter, and all of these really positive things, or at least that's what they used to say very honorably, they're now almost to the point of being like in the bad old days of the one-drop rule and things. It is really, it's very disturbing to see the Democrats become absolutely so obsessed with race. But But
she's polling really well despite all this.
She is polling well.
I think that's hilarious because I would love to see her versus Trump.
Trump will make such hay out of it. And he was actually at a speech the other day, and he actually said that, that his words were, we hit her really hard on that. It did hurt her for a while. We can do it again. She will cop an absolute bruising from that. Interestingly, she tried to get into this a bit and start to try and backfill and say, look, try and make friends with some Native American groups, get their support.
Well, she did issue an apology. I think this is important for people at home. At first, she didn't issue an apology. She said, look, she released the results of the DNA tests specifically at Donald Trump because he had made a bet that she didn't have the American blood. She goes, aha, this means Donald Trump has to pay, I don't know how much money they were betting over. It was very funny. But then the backlash. So this shows how blind she was to the ridiculousness of how little she actually linked back to it. She didn't apologize until after all the Native American groups actually were infuriated.
Yeah, and that is one of the things that's just ridiculous about this was how blind she was to this, and that she went down this road and she rolled the dice, and then rather than taking the Ancestry.com results and burning them in the fireplace and then spreading the ashes out over the Charles River in Boston, Massachusetts, she decided to put them on her website.
But you were saying as well, it looks like she's trying to make amends and she's trying to bend. Can you talk to me a little bit?
Well,
what is she doing with these groups now?
So she gave a speech to a Native American group the other day.
Right.
She talked to them.
Riveting, I'm sure.
And the enthusiasm was reported to be, shall we say, lukewarm. So she's got some activists who are trying to push her. Others within the Native American community are saying, oh, come on, this is ridiculous. And the Cherokee Nation, which she claimed to be a part of, which actually basically...
Well, they've utterly rejected
her. They've utterly rejected her. They said, well, I'm sorry, no, you can't go around claiming membership in this. But
she has a cooking book as well.
Yeah, she put a recipe into a cookbook.
But none of the recipes are Native American. They're like burgers and stuff.
So, I mean, it was just, like the weird... pandering that she's done.
She's a ridiculous human being.
On that level,
and
she
I really
is,
hope
but
she wins
Jack,
the primaries.
But Jack, what has history taught us? If history has taught us anything, as Michael Corleone famously said, it's that the ridiculous can go very far. A lot of people,
that's true.
A lot of people.
I would argue that Donald Trump is
a lot of
quite
people would say that about Donald Trump. But so here's the thing: Warren, I think, in my books, is right now firming up as a likely nominee. I think her odds are improving by the day because she is, for all of her this goofiness around the race stuff, she is pretty far left enough, I think, to satisfy the wokies in the Democratic Party. She is.
You'd hope so.
Well, I mean, my God, I mean, what do they want to? Reanimate Joseph Stalin?
Doesn't she want a multi-trillion-dollar green fund that other nations can pitch into?
I mean, so she's to the right of AOC, but she's and she's even to the right of Bernie Sanders. But she's no dummy. She's tactics around her American Indian heritage aside, she is no dummy.
There is a strategy to it.
There is a strategy. She's done a lot of work on consumer law and protections for consumers, and she can speak to aggrieved feelings of American middle classes. So I think she is going to be a threat. Joe Biden is deflating. He is deflating at a rate of knots. We will see this happen. It might not happen next week or next month, but you can almost take it to the bank that he's not going to be the nominee, and simply because he needs a nap. He needs a nap. He really shouldn't have done this. He should have gone and retired on a high and said, I'm just going to sit back and watch this clown show.
So I think we've actually got, for the people watching us, we've got some of the polls, and I'll read through them. Biden is now at 31%. In July, he was at 33%, so he's dropped 2 points. Warren's at 20%. That's up from 12%.
See, that's big.
That's an 8-point jump.
That's big. And
Sanders is down 5 points to 10%.
And that's because, with Sanders, as we keep saying on this show, Sanders needs somebody to bounce off of, and Sanders' routine was that and in fact, he was treated really horribly and unfairly by the Democrats and the establishment. He needs an establishment to fight against.
That's interesting. I haven't heard that. Yeah,
and there's no better establishment hate figure than Hillary Clinton. So a lot of the Bernie support, though, I can tell you that, is going to bleed off to Trump.
So I think whenever you see Bernie Sanders swings really far to left and he goes, free healthcare for all, and then Elizabeth Warren goes, freer healthcare for all, it's almost part of her strategy. She takes out that, she knocks him off by the knees because she's prepared to go just as far.
She doesn't present with the crazed, wild
what do you call him? You call him a cookie monster.
Because he talks like this, and he's Bernie Sanders, and he says, I'm going to give you free health care, but your cookie tax, Jack, is going to go up. So that is
I'll tell you
that is his routine. And Elizabeth Warren, she seems like a really nice, earnest, well-educated, middle-class person, and I think there's just a normality about her, which I think, and this is one reason why, incidentally, I do think there is a vulnerability to Trump, and one of the big Trump vulnerabilities, I think, is fatigue, because the Trump presidency, it's a roller coaster ride, and every day it's something new, and every day is something crazy, and tomorrow we're going to buy Greenland, and today we're doing this, and and who knows who he's going to attack next, and it's very unpredictable. And I think that if the Democrats are smart, they will try to play up this idea that we need some stability and calm.
Yeah, but they won't. They're
But
going to tear
won't.
each other
They
apart.
won't. But
Equally, Donald Trump, if he makes this a story about America's economic story, even though, look, there is some talks that the economy may actually take a bad turn, and if that does happen, he is in a lot of strife, because that's his whole thing.
Yeah. And not only is it his whole thing, Jack, if you go back and you look basically at every presidential re-election campaign, the thing that determines pretty much whether or not a president gets a second term is how the economy is doing. So that's why Bush won, didn't win again in 92, because, Bill Clinton, the economy had started to stagnate and stuff after the big 80s boom, and then there was sort of a kind of a recession they had to have. I think it was around the same time as the one in Australia. And then Bill Clinton came in and said, "It's the economy, stupid," and he started to do,
You're very good with your impressions today.
Oh, I got tons of them, Jack. We're going to be here all day. But the thing is that Clinton then, became this sort of economic president. And, it's interesting just to think back about the kind of president Bill Clinton was. Bill Clinton could never win the presidency today, not because of his ridiculous
trips to Pedophile Island,
his any trips to with
the fact that he visited Pedophile Island seven times.
Epstein. Well, that was after his presidency, but the other thing too was that he was really he was about that kind of economic, technocratic, non-culture warry type of presidency, whereas. And so,
the Democratic Party is its best when they're a party of the workers, just like Labour in Australia. They've lost that.
They've lost that. So, and they're not a party of class warfare. Remember, Ronald Reagan set the model for John Howard. Ronald Reagan carved off Labour voters who were upset and annoyed by the radical veering to the left in the 70s of the Democrats, and John Howard did the same thing here with Labor and made what was the establishment business party really the party of the working man. The interesting thing in both countries, of course, is that how the left is now the party of the very rich. That's an interesting thing, which we need to go into another time. But, so, going through these...
Can we just go to Kamala Harris? Because you actually kind of predicted her drop-off, I think, in our inaugural episode of this show. And she's now dropped even further, because I think she popped up to 15 at one point. I know she wasn't on this particular March one. But she's dropped from 10% down to 8%, a drop of 2 points. And her attacks on Joe Biden, which saw her get this kind of surge in the polls in the very first attack, they've dropped off. People are no longer interested in what Kamala Harris has to say. What's your theory with this?
Look, there's a lot of things. I think, just at root, Kamala Harris isn't a very nice or likable person, and people really started to see that
Tell us what you really think.
Debate when Tulsi Gabbard, who I adore and I think would be a phenomenal candidate, but the Democrats would never pick her, in a pink fit, but, really went after her hard for her record when she was a prosecutor in California, including, all sorts of malfeasances, including that she withheld exculpatory information about a death penalty defendant. And people were like, hang on a second, do you want this person to be in charge?
She was a ruthless prosecutor.
Absolutely ruthless. And, her whole routine about, trying to, again, get involved with the African-American community, she just prosecuted the hell out of African Americans for minor drug possession and things like that, and that's a huge liability for her.
Donald Trump, actually, it may have been at the behest of some celebrities such as Kim Kardashian, but he's actually started releasing some people that had marijuana convictions.
Well,
so you've completely turned on the tables that perception of it being a left v right issue.
It is interesting because
you couldn't do that in Australia still.
Do that in Australia,
if you were a conservative candidate in Australia and you were talking about letting people out of jail for drug convictions, you would be compared with the Greens. So it's
absolutely.
Really interesting the juxtaposition.
It's interesting to see these celebrity worlds combine on what is an interesting issue because there are a lot of people who say that overzealous drug prosecutions really devastated a lot of poor and minority neighborhoods and communities, and ripped a lot of people out of those communities and warehoused them in prison and left families without fathers. And things like that.
It is quite tragic.
We
actually probably could learn a little bit of a lesson from the approach that the Republicans are now taking.
Look, I think our drug problems in Australia are probably fairly different. I think the ICE situation, which was probably a real crisis in a lot of our regional,
particularly out west, and
in regional cities and regional towns, it's just absolutely terrible. I think that probably requires a slightly different response, but,
Yeah.
you know.
No, definitely don't let people on ice.
Yeah, no. No.
But hey, can we talk? I love this.
Yeah.
The leaked transcript from the New York Times.
Oh, my God.
This is my favorite story.
So, okay, as a newsman, and you as a newsman, and we've both spent a lot of time in newsrooms, and we've both, had these sort of town halls with editors and executives to, say, where we're going as a paper.
They're normally pretty tame and professional.
Well, they're normally pretty professional. They also generally don't say, all right, men, or not men, because you can never say, all right, men anymore.
Don't you gender the staff of the New York Times,
all right,
sir.
You genderless humanoids of the New York Times, we have a mission.
Gender is a construct, James.
It is a social construct.
It is
a construct built
you
on
are born
built on
nothing.
a foundation of sand, Jack.
You're born a homogeneous blob,
and
society dictates
we are all
what your gender
all
is.
Blobs
Don't you
the
forget
Lord,
that.
Jack. Yes,
you bigot.
The thing, though, with the New York Times, though, is that they had this huge meeting where they talked about the Trump campaign, and they said, and I'm actually going to read a little bit because the transcript got leaked, and it was really fiery, but let me read a little bit. Executive editor saying, it got trickier after Inaudible. Went from being a story about whether the Trump campaign had colluded with Russia and obstruction of justice to being a more head-on story about the president's character. We built our newsroom to cover one story, this editor is saying, and we did it truly well. Now we have to regroup and shift resources and emphasis to take on a different story. And so...
What is that different story?
What is the different story?
Contemporary racism.
No, Jack, not contemporary racism. The new thing is something called Project 1619. And if you're out there on Twitter, you can hashtag Project 1619, and you'll see basically what it's about. And the essential idea of this is to say that so we're just going to forget that the whole Russia investigation ever existed. We're going to...
We were never saying there was collusion with Russia.
But of course, and the subtext to all of this is two things, is that they want to, A, get Trump, but B, that they had simply built their entire newsroom to cover a story which anybody who, I have been saying for years, this Russia thing's not going to pan out. Anybody who followed the case closely, thought this whole idea that, Putin was pulling the strings of Trump was just insane. They've still got a podcast over at the ABC, which is still devoted to proving this sort of thing. the people...
God bless the ABC.
God bless the ABC.
And their billion-dollar budget.
And enjoy my tax dollars, guys. I hope you're enjoying them. But the thing is that Project 1619, this is the idea that they want to say from the very first settlement of the United States, or even, colonial United States, the entire dominant narrative. I think we have a tweet from Mara Gay, who is on the editorial board. We might just throw that up on the screen and read that out. She said, in the days and weeks to come, we will publish essays demonstrating that nearly everything that has made America exceptional grew out of slavery. Now,
look, slavery is a big part of the American story, but is it the only part? And some of these articles, and the reason why I was talking about contemporary racism is because what they're doing is very simplistic. I would argue childish and intellectually dishonest. They're saying this is something horrible that happened in the past. Now let's look at healthcare and hospitals. And the reason that people don't like that is because of slavery.
So,
if you're going to make a claim like that, you better have a very, very good intellectual argument.
So really what they're doing here is two things. Number one, they will be running stories that are entirely accurate on the facts, but they're put together in such a way that they create an entirely inaccurate narrative. So do you think that, Washington soldiers, who were these, ragtag militiamen fighting the professional British Army at Lexington and Concord and all of these places against the British, they weren't fighting for slavery. The American Revolution was not about slavery. The Civil War was about slavery, and hundreds of thousands of people
and what about all the white abolitionists that actually pushed for this and then died and gave up their lives? It's so simplistic and ridiculous.
But Jack, the ultimate, and I think sinister thing here is that this sort of thing, because it is the New York Times, and I know we laugh about the New York Times, we joke about the New York Times, and we line our bird cages with the New York Times. The New York Times still sets the agenda, and so newsrooms around the United States are going to be looking at that, and they'll be trying to find, stories that pick up this theme, because they're going to say, well, the New York Times is doing it. Let's, do something along this line.
It gives it a lot of validity. You're right.
It goes into the schools. It certainly gets picked up here in Australia by our media, because a lot of I think the Fairfax 9 outlets, they pick up New York Times stuff all the time. The ABC will be picking up on this theme in all of their coverage of the of the election.
2020 is going to be looked at through the lens of Trump being a racist by our domestic media.
So they're going to say Trump's a racist. If you support Trump, therefore ipso facto you're a racist. But really, ultimately, to do this, it's such a destructive thing that they're doing, because ultimately what they're doing is delegitimizing the American project, which, while always having been flawed and imperfect, has also been one of the most successful nations at incorporating everybody who wants to come and join and be part of the American creed.
Yeah, and there's also this bizarre link to slavery and capitalism, where they're saying that modern capitalism is it's a product of slavery, therefore it can only be looked through the lens of... But here's the thing. Capitalism is a free market system, and it's actually intrinsically opposed to the idea of slavery, because you can't isolate a section and make them slaves.
And in fact, Jack,
that's not capitalism.
The history of it, Jack, is that the industrialized North did not rely on slavery. They economically advanced far faster than the plantation economy, slave-based economy of the South, which was a failed economy because it relied, and slave economies always wind up performing more poorly than non-slave economies. That is just a demonstrable fact around the world, and you saw that with the North versus the South. So,
and the North had a freer economy, and it was one of the fundamental reasons why they won.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because because as we also know, those sorts of wars are always won ultimately as contests of production. So
definitely. But look, for people at home who are looking at these comments, they're looking at the New York Times, and they're listening to Beto O'Rourke's speech about how everyone's a racist, and you're thinking, I don't feel like a racist, I don't think I've done it. You're not a racist, and you're quite right to be a little bit upset about being called that. But what I want to know is, how is this going to play out in the election? If you're told you're a racist, and do they think they're going to shame people into voting against Trump if anyone who's a Trump supporter is declared a white supremacist?
If you start to call everybody a racist, then no one is a racist.
And
so
the word loses all meaning.
It loses all meaning. It just becomes, when everything is racist, nothing is racist. That's the thing. The word racist is a powerful word, and it needs to be reserved for when somebody does something, actually really racist. And how well, Jack, did deplorables go down? Did Americans like to be called deplorables because they had different attitudes than the woke coastal elite? I mean, are they going to now say, because what they want to do is they want to say it is now impossible to have any discussion of immigration policy short of, we should just open the borders and decriminalize entry because, otherwise you're racist. So
I've got a conspiracy theory here. I think Donald Trump has been so profitable for the New York Times and its economy of race. Think about how much financial trouble the New York Times was in before Donald Trump. And then you saw all over Facebook and social media when he came in, they said, help us fight Donald Trump with subscriptions. Subscribe to the New York Times. It's a race economy. And the quotes from this town hall with the editors, the executive editor of the New York Times, is directly saying, let's make race our number one issue, campaign on it.
And so they're poisoning...
They're intentionally trying to get Donald Trump to win, because they're handing him this, calling the entire country a racist. They support him.
I mean, look,
they want Donald Trump to win.
I was going to say that they'd be giving red meat to their readers, but I'm not sure their meat. Maybe they need to get some, tofu red meat or whatever that fake, stuff that they're doing in the labs.
In the name of climate change,
in the name of climate change, of course, because
no carbon-based life.
Carbon-based life. Thank you. They're not going to be eating Greta Thunbergers. Okay there, Jack. The
Greta Thunbergers.
You have it with cheese imported from all
they're
over
tofu,
the world.
aren't they?
No. You have the most carbon miles that you could imagine for that.
But she takes a boat everywhere. She's a true believer. I actually respect the fact that she's sailing through the Pacific.
I love it. Sailing across the Atlantic. Of course, there's a crew of 5 that had to fly across the Atlantic to take the boat back. But
Did they really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
and look, I've done some long sails on those racing yachts, and it's fairly primitive. So I hope she's all right on that. But yeah,
That's hilarious. Hey, can we talk about this? Is another fantastic story. Rashida Tlaib.
Oh God.
Ilhan Omar.
Oh God.
Israel. Did Donald Trump prompt them to, or are they just so toxic that Israel was right to not let them in the country?
Israel was totally right not to let them in the country. Okay, so just for the background for everybody watching, everybody listening, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, they're two members of the Squad, both virulently anti-Israeli, both big pushers of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So Israel has a law that says, if you are coming to this country to advocate for boycotting Israel, you can't come.
Not only that, the boycotting movement that they support, because this is very important, they actually are supporters of terrorists and people that have blown up buses and everything. So like you've done this same trip that I did. I just came back from Israel. I was there less than a month ago, and we went into Palestine, and we saw these monuments that they have to terrorists who have blown up buses of Israeli children. Yeah. Now, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are supporters of the boycott movement, which thinks that is an appropriate way to deal with what they perceive to be oppressors.
Absolutely.
It is so disgusting. And to think that Israel shouldn't be able to ban them from coming? And, who do they think they are?
And, the attempts to sort of, defend these guys has been just, horrifying. But their trip was actually organized by a group called Miftah, which presents itself as a Palestinian peace organization.
Yes.
However, this organization, among other things, they have published articles on their website endorsing the Blood Libel, the idea that Jews use the blood of Christians in their Passover rituals, which is an ancient, deeply demented anti-Semitic conspiracy that has been used from Russia to Nazi Germany to through the Middle Ages.
It's a full-on conspiracy theory, which is not true.
And it's deeply evil, and has been used
just a lie.
For centuries to, it's more than a lie. I mean, like, a lie is, my tie is red, but this is just so dementedly evil because it has been used over the centuries to institute huge pogroms against Jewish people. So that's bad. They have published, this organization has published outfits like Nazi types who have published articles on the website about how the Jews control the media. I mean, like, totally wacko stuff. So why would you let them in?
Yeah, why would you let them in?
Why would you let them in?
And here's the thing. They did actually let Rashida Tlaib in eventually. So last week they said, okay, because this was her argument. She goes, I've got a grandmother who lives in Palestine and I need to see her. And they said, okay, well then you get to go see your grandmother. And she goes, how dare they make me sign a note saying that the trip is just my grandmother. And then she goes, if I was to accept this. So not only is the media completely incorrect about them banning them, they've played it up as if Donald Trump pressured Bibi into blocking them from Israel, and Israel actually let her come in.
Donald Trump actually had
insane.
A phenomenal tweet about this, where he went after them and basically said, that everything that Rashida Tlaib said about Palestine was a lie, and the only winners in her getting banned was Rashida Tlaib's grandmother, because now she doesn't have to see her. So.
And so, look, I feel for anyone in the Palestinian situation. It's a really horrible situation for everyone, for the Israelis, for the Palestinians. But these two people, the only reason they were going to go there was to stir up incitement and to really cause trouble.
And look, just to sort of veer off into foreign policy for a minute.
Please.
This is during the Obama presidency, there was a sort of sense that among Obama that if you solved the Israeli-Palestinian problem, everything else in the Middle East, everything else in the world would fall into place. And what's really interesting about Trump's presidency is how now he has moved the conversation so far on, so that the Israeli-Palestinian fight isn't really the main game in the Middle East.
The election,
the main game in the Middle East now is Iran. But you've had deals made with the UAE and with the Saudis and things like that. So the openness to Israel is actually changing. And,
the election
wasn't
in Israel. The election wasn't even really, the conversation wasn't about Palestine. It was all about Iran.
Correct.
And the fact that Hezbollah has 100,000 missiles pointed at
Correct.
That's what they're worried about.
That's the existential threat. Quite rightly. I've seen those on the northern border, and it's pretty scary. And so you can understand that. And I'll just say on the Palestinians, they have. I forget who it was, but a great Israeli statement once said that the Palestinians never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And I think what's happened is the Arab world has just tired of giving them opportunities to figure out some way to settle this. And so I think that until they just decide, we're just going to have to get on with our lives, then yeah.
Let's take it a little bit of a lighter note. I think can we talk a little bit about Donald Trump trolling Greenland?
I love this.
And I think we have a tweet here with Donald Trump actually has a little bit of a pun at them where he's put a Trump tower in the middle of Greenland. He's tweeted it out.
Yeah, so somebody has somebody has done this fantastic meme. I think the guy's name was Xjohn on Twitter.
Look at that. That's brilliant.
Put a Trump tower sort of casino hotel on
he's
this
just trolling
rocky
them.
beach in Greenland, and he says, "I promise not to do this to Greenland." But the Greenland thing is such a fascinating thing because Greenland is owned by the Danish, I think, and administered as a territory, but. I think this is an interesting sort of play that Donald Trump was just simply saying, hey, I'm watching what Russia's trying to do in the Arctic, and we're thinking about that.
So there's a serious note to it.
There is a serious note, but as always, there's something so entertaining because, like this idea that you would just go out and buy Greenland.
How did people in Greenland react? Because I understand they were a bit miffed, and some of the people were actually saying...
Well, look, you can just imagine everybody sending their Greenland correspondents out to do, vox pops of everybody... talking about. It's interesting though is that the Vikings called Greenland because they want to attract people to it.
My ancestors,
your ancestors, yeah. Are you 1/24th Greenlander?
I'm at least a full percentage point, so I get all of the ethnic privileges involved with my Viking.
Make Greenland great again, Jack.
Yep.
That's what we're doing.
I probably have a stake to the land if you go by Elizabeth Warren logic.
That's right.
Yeah.
What do they eat in Greenland, Jack? I imagine it's a lot of fish.
Whale blubber. Just straight up whale blubber.
I imagine there's a lot of fish and maybe some puffin involved. But anyway, I remember flying over Greenland once, flying home from Iceland to New York once. It looks actually absolutely beautiful from the air. So I think it would be an interesting place to go, but I'm not sure quite how you go about buying Greenland. It's not the sort of thing that you get kind of an off-market offer.
I just love how much fun he's having. So he weathers a lot of attacks. He's getting 100%. Called racist. He's being blamed for tearing America apart. Apparently, he's the cause of all racism that is contemporary in America. And here he is. He's having a bit of fun. He's tweeting out. He's ribbing. I think he's in good shape. I think he's in really good shape. And right now, I don't see him being beaten.
Yesterday, Fox had a poll 53-47 on his approving the handling of the economy. Again,
and as you said, that is the fundamental issue.
The economy is the fundamental issue. The other thing, though, of course, also, as I said last week, and I'll continue to say, is that I do think that there's a lot of America's enemies who will be looking to take a poke at him and goad him into some sort of conflict that will hurt him domestically because you remember that the Trump defense and foreign policy was really about we are not getting involved in overseas conflicts. And so I think there will be some effort to try and draw the United States in. So I think he has been very, very good about that. Aside from firing a few missiles into Syria at one point over some chemical weapons, done very little in terms of kinetic use of American force overseas. And I think that's probably to the good.
Well, look, I think that's a great moment to leave it. And
hang on, Jack. I think you've got for us. What is the wokest moment of the week? Can we shift gears from Greenland to World War III to the wokest moment of the week?
So we're going to play you out with what I believe to be one of the wokest moments of the week. Apparently, this is a male, but MSNBC contributor Elie Mystal, a male, not a woman.
Is that champagne?
I've no Cristal. No, it's Mistal. Anyway, here's a clip of Ellie or Eli or however you pronounce it, telling people to use pitchforks and torches when protesting pro-Trump donors.
I have no problem with shining the light back on the donors who fund this kind of racialized hate. I go further. I want pitchforks and torches outside this man's house in the Hamptons. I've been to the Hamptons. It's very nice. There's no reason why it has to be.
Pitchforks and torches. Well,
charming fella.
Charming. Go down to Bunnings and
I'd love to have a tea with him.
Head down to Bunnings, get your pitchforks and torches. Go head over to the Hamptons, the Billionaires
Let's
Resort,
burn some stuff.
and hang out in front of millionaires' houses. That's great. Anyway, Jack Houghton, thanks so much for joining us this week. That is all we have for this episode of Race to 2020, the new podcast from Sky News Australia. If you're listening, I hope you've subscribed. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe using your favorite platform. Thanks for your company, and we will see you next Wednesday.